Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today. And I want to start by talking a moment about Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is a huge proponent of getting out of debt and the value of getting out of debt for you and your family. And one of the worst kinds of debt, maybe the worst kind of debt, is the kind where the interest keeps racking up. You've got a credit card, you've got loans, and the foolishness of only making the minimum payments while the interest continues to pile up. I mean, that's enough to send you to an early grave if you stop and think about your personal financial situation and interest piling up. Meanwhile, we have the federal government, which has now crossed a new threshold. You think, well, how could it get any worse? Here's a new threshold we've crossed. Elections matter, folks, by the way. Here's the latest alarm bell. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that the federal government has now spent more money on paying interest on the national debt than on the military in fiscal year 2024 so far. So according to these statistics, we've spent $412 billion on military programs at the Department of Defense through the first half of the fiscal year 2024. That's $412 billion on military. $440 billion just on the interest of the national debt, which is now over $34 trillion. That's the national debt. So we have this out of control, massive federal budget. I'll say this, they're drunk on spending, addicted to solving problems by throwing money at them. But what are we spending all that money on? Now we have this number, as reported by at kff.org. Listen to this. This is a quote. Outlays from the federal government on health programs and services in fiscal year 2023. That's the whole fiscal last year. $1.9 trillion. That's a huge portion of the federal budget. What do we make of all this? And is there anything we can even think logically about it on our small little local level? We're going to talk to somebody about that. Mike Sharman is back on the phone line with us. Mike is the legal counsel for Share Healthcare. We've talked about Share Healthcare, the nonprofit Christian healthcare sharing ministry. We'll talk more about Share Healthcare in a little bit. You've heard their ads here on Rave 194. They bought a little airtime. But Mike Sharman, we're looking at this problem that a lot of people think, I don't even want to think about it. I've got my own problems. This is too huge. It's too big of a deal. I can't do anything about it anyway. What are we to make of the huge national debt, the giant amount of spending, and including the fact that a huge percentage of that spending is now on healthcare? What are we supposed to make of all this, Mike?
Well, we might want to go back to Ronald Reagan's wife's campaign that she had as First Lady of the Just Say No campaign. Hers was related to drugs, just say no. But I think we need to be, as voters, having to just say no to our elected officials. No, we don't need more of this. We don't need more of that. In fact, we need less of this than we need less of that. We need our elected officials to do what my wife has said of, drink a glass of milk and grow a spine. Be willing to say, no, I'm not going to vote on excessive items that really don't need to be there. Yes, I am going to work on that. We as individuals need to be able to say, okay, I am going to be self-sufficient as much as is possible for me to do. I am going to try to be, an independent person as much as that's possible for me to do. And what I can't do in my own independence, then my dependence should be on God and his creation, the church. And we should share one another's burdens, bear one another up, help each other out. Those numbers that you mentioned, Doug, are just absolutely incredible. You mentioned Dave Ramsey, but Larry Burkett, a predecessor, let's say, of Dave Ramsey's, has since the 1980s, up until his death, he had said, we're going to hit a time sometime when the interest on our national debt is going to be so crippling, it'll exceed our defense budget. And then it'll get past that, and it'll be to where we can't support it. Well, I never thought that we would have a time where the interest payments, again, we're not paying off the debt. This is just just like on your credit card where it has minimum payment required. This is just the minimum payment required on our national debt is bigger than our defense budget. And that defense budget is not just active defense, buying new weapons, etc. I mean, that includes our retirement, that we're retired soldiers of all time. So when you look at us in history, you look at what economic difficulty we've had at different times. Right after the Revolutionary War, one of the biggest problems was paying off the cost, the defense cost of that war, the debt that we incurred because of that war. Then Civil War, well, that was a huge big deal. How do we pay off the debt on both sides from that war? How then do you also deal with the pensions from that war and paying that off? That was huge. And yet they did in the Revolutionary War. They did pay it off. They did in the Civil War. They did pay it off in actually a relatively short period of time. The same was true with post-World War I. The same was true with post-World War II. We incurred a large amount of debt, and then we paid it off. Well, here, no one, I mean, you can talk to anyone in Washington or beyond, and no one has an idea of how we're actually going to pay off this debt. And now the interest is so much higher than this year, just now. We've exceeded where it is more than our total defense budget, just the interest on it. And it looks like it's going to be about 20%, 10 to 20% higher in 2029. It'll be higher than our defense budget. And you mentioned about how, okay, we look at that, then we look at our healthcare spending, because we have healthcare spending. And what are we actually spending? The federal government's spending on healthcare, what is it spending? It's spending borrowed money. That's why we have that huge interest, because we're borrowing the money to pay for things that our regular taxes can't pay for. And so, we have $1.9 trillion in health programs and services, and that the last total year we have is fiscal 2023. And just within that, we're paying $8.4 billion in global health, which means we're paying $8.4 billion on people's health outside the U.S. And then there's one line item, other federal outlays of health programs and services, not even mentioning what it is, $4.5 trillion. The Medicare, Medicaid and CHIP, Child Health Insurance Program, other health, non-Medicare, the Veterans Hospital and Medical Care, the mandatory part and the discretionary part. I mean, it's just an enormous amount. And what can we do about it? Well, that is one of the reasons why Share Healthcare was created. So we can begin having a tool to at least have a small subculture, us Christians, who are actually believing Christians, who are Bible-believing Christians, that we do believe we're supposed to share one another's needs, and have the church help us out when we can't individually, by our own independence. We don't have the financial ability and financial strength to do it. So what is the tool God created for us to help us? The church. So here is the body of Christ coming together to share one another's needs. It's $149 per month for a single, $249 for a couple, $349 for a family of four, and then $50 for each family member after that. So that involves no government spending. It is by the healthcare providers are happy to get the payments that we give them, even though we negotiate down from the retail amount. We still pay them more than they would get with Medicare or Medicaid or any one of the other government programs. So they like what we do in negotiation. Maybe we'll never get big enough that we will actually make an impact on these huge numbers that we're talking about. But each one of us individually are asking, man, this is just going way out of control. What can I do to help? Besides your own individual family budget, what can I do to help this? Well, you are helping. When you come together with other Christians to share one another's medical expenses, and you're not relying on government spending, there you are. you're helping that total program. Then you begin thinking, well, how did we get here? I mean, this is just totally crazy of we're spending more on the interest in debt than defense. We're spending this huge amount in federal government care, medical care. I mean, how did we get there? Well, those same days that I was looking at those articles that had the Forbes article on the interest payments, and then it referenced the Kaiser Family Foundation article with the medical ones that I mentioned. The same day had an article on Democratic Congresswoman tells students that moon is made up mostly of gases. So when you wonder, well, how did we get here? Didn't our elected officials know better? Well, no. Surprisingly, some of them even think the moon's made of gases, even though we've had men land on the moon and it's not gases, it's rock and dust. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas, the Democrat from Texas, was speaking to high school students for a solar eclipse talk. And you'd think she might have gotten kind of informed about, well, there's this moon and it goes in front of the sun, and the sun, does this. Well, here's what she said when she's talking to these high school students. She said, so you have the energy of the moon at night. Okay, let's pause there. No, the moon doesn't have energy at night. The moon reflects the sun at night. The sun has energy, so she kind of messed it there. And then she says, sometimes you need to take the opportunity just to come out and see a full moon in that completed rounded circle, which is made up mostly of gases. Well, no, it's not. It just isn't. I mean, I don't have any idea where she even got that. It just is not. It's a solid object. And then she says, I don't know about you, but I want to be the first in line to learn how to live and survive on the moon. That's another planet that we're going to see shortly. And, well, now there's another mistake. It's not a planet. It's a moon. So when we begin looking at these numbers and think, well, how can anybody be uneducated enough, ill-informed enough, crazy enough to be voting for all these huge numbers that just keep going on? There's going to be disaster coming from this. Well, we look at this article on what this Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee said to high school students, who all of which probably knew she was wrong, and hopefully politely sat there and then giggled about it later. That's the reason. So, folks, you need to run for office. I mentioned Larry Burkett before, and he was saying if we had Congress made up of homemakers who have to deal with their own monthly budget, we would not have these problems. So that's my little diatribe that I have on that, Doug. We got to make a change. Things have to start turning around, and share healthcare is just one small tool to help us try to be able to do that.
Well, I like about what you said, and that is making a difference by not adding yourself, by taking those government, adding to the national debt by taking the government money. There's this idea, you might have heard of this phrase, FOMO, which stands for the fear of missing out. And that is a legitimate fear that people feel when there's government money available and they don't take it.
Absolutely. And it's hard. So during COVID, we got sent a check. We didn't need it. We didn't want it. And we asked, how do we send it back? Why are you sending every single household this money when the bulk of us don't need it?
Right.
And okay, maybe government's supposed to do some things compassionately. We can discuss that, argue about that. But why give it to people who don't need it?
It was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen.
Yeah. And now we're talking about the student loan programs. And the students wouldn't be in the big problem that they're in with these large student loans if the government hadn't intervened into the marketplace in the first place. I mean, colleges used to be relatively affordable. Professors used to teach because they loved to teach, as opposed to it's really well paid and you can't fire them. I mean, there's a reason why the cliche jacket that professors wore had patches on the elbow, because they, it wasn't something you did to make money at. It wasn't something that the school had a huge endowment that they did not use for their students. And And then the student loan programs, most people don't know this, but it's a guarantee that the federal government gives to whatever bank or lending entity gives out the student loan. Those people that actually give the loan are just a processor, and they receive a certain percentage on that. And the government guarantees them, well, even if somebody defaults, don't worry about it, we'll pay you back. It's a real problem, and yet if somebody wants a better education, they think I need to go to college to get it, and I need to pay this money, and so I'm going to take this loan out. And so now we have a lot of people who are essentially lured in with this bait and switch. Take this loan, you'll make more money. Sometimes that works. You know, we hear about doctors' huge medical expenses. Yes, but when you look at their medical expense compared to their first year's earnings, they'll be able to pay off their total loans with under a year's income, which is not the case if you're in education or journalism, history, or any of the other liberal arts courses. So we can go on from there of, well, how did the government subsidies, how did the government guarantee on mortgages, how did that start inflating the cost of housing? Yeah, well, it did. You just look at when those programs began and look at the cost of housing, bam, went up. Well, what about the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid? When those were instituted, the cost of health care just started increasing. The more we had as a percentage of federal spending into national health care spending, each time we injected a new program, you'd see the cost of health care going up. Not just that the total spending of it did, but a program that used to cost $1,000 now will cost $1,100, cost $1,110, et cetera. It's the government creating a false floor and a false ceiling for the care or the schooling or the housing that distorts the market that otherwise would adjust itself as long as we use government for what it should do of punishing the wrongdoers. And so in the marketplace, we might have wrongdoers of monopolies or oligarchies that we want to prevent, and government should intervene there. But that's not what's going on. We tend to have government subsidy that supports oligarchies and monopolies. So we all just need to learn that just say no. No, I don't need more money. No, I don't want you to vote on that. As our elected officials, don't ask for more money and don't spend more money.
Yeah, we had a huge situation here in Florida back when Rick Scott was the governor because the federal government, I think this was during the Obama administration, was going to give Florida just buckets of cash to build a high-speed rail line between Tampa and Orlando. Mm-hmm. As those cities grow and they kind of grow closer together and, you know, maybe eons down the line, they'll bump into each other. They're pretty far apart. But the governor said, we don't need a high-speed rail line. We just don't need it. It's a waste of money and we're not going to do it. And of course, a sector of the populace howled, why would you turn down this free money? But when you look at the national debt, somebody's got to say no.
Right. And high-speed rail has always been an incredibly expensive transportation tool. How about if we really want railroads, how about if we just say back to the railroads, by the way, can we have our rail lines back? We want to once again privatize them so you could take a passenger train from, say, Fort Worth to Orlando. You can't do it. And we need to be looking at, well, what did we spend money on and then give it to somebody or subsidize it? I mean, how many, we could just go on and on and on.
Oh.
And look at government housing. Has that actually helped people, or has that created a pocket of desperation, let's say? What we want to be doing is just looking individually at ourselves. What can I do to be more self-sufficient? What can I do to start just putting my hand to something as opposed to putting my hand out for something?
So I like this comparison, and that is comparing it to some people. If you're very concerned about climate change and your carbon footprint, they'll have a deep conviction that even though it may not seem to be a big deal, I'm going to do my little part. by whatever. I'm going to walk to the library instead of drive today to cut down on my carbon footprint. Well, that same attitude can carry over to, for example, I'm going to become a part of Share Healthcare and get off the government bandwagon when it comes to meeting my healthcare expenses. Now, yes, it involves some sacrifice, just like walking to the library instead of driving to the library. That's a sacrifice. Recycling. Well, that's kind of a pain in the rear end to recycle. Just throw it all in a trash can. Well, no, you go the extra mile to do some recycling because you want to do your little part for the environment. Well, in this case, what little part can we each do to try to make sure our federal government doesn't collapse one day under the weight of its own foolish spending? Well, here's one way to do it, and that's with Share Healthcare. So as we wrap up our time today, Mike, tell them a little bit about Share Healthcare.
Well, Share Healthcare is a 501c3 nonprofit ministry, and its specific ministry is helping Christians share one another's medically necessary medical expenses. We do that in an organized fashion. As I mentioned, it's $149 for a single, $249 for a couple, $349 for a family of four, and then $50 for each person after that. And that when a person has a medical need, a algorithm makes sure that the right amount of money goes from each one of the other person's accounts into that person who has a medical need. And it goes from there either to their healthcare provider if the bill hasn't yet been paid, or if the person has already paid the bill, then it goes back to them as a reimbursement. It's pretty simple. It's passing the plate across the nation and across denominations in an organized and deliberate way. Is, as we mentioned, is just one small way that we can help grab our culture back from being a dependent victim mentality secular culture to being a self-sufficient, independent, and mutually dependent Christian culture. Not everybody's a Christian, but the culture was. And why was that? Because people could look at what the Christians were doing and they would want to copy it, even if they weren't believers. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to be doing again, is being an example, that light on the hill, that example to the whole world, first to our family, then to our community, our state, our nation, and then globally, by just trying to emulate what Christ wanted us to do, and that was love one another in practical, realistic ways. Realistic means it happens in reality. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's miraculous, but it happens in reality. And that's what we can do. And so what we are able to, that's the next step that we need to take.
Well, if you'd like more information about Share Healthcare, you can give them a call and just talk to somebody at 1-844-SHARE-HC, or you can find them online at sharehealthcare.com and find all the information there. And for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.